Well, hello friends, my name is Nick and today I'm going to share 10 tips for beginner indoor gardeners. These are 10 tips that I wish I had when I was first dipping my toes into the houseplant hobby. Unfortunately, they each took me a couple of years to figure out, but each of these tips are something that I learned from experience, and I'm hoping to fast track you from beginner gardener to novice or intermediate gardener, whatever the next step up is from beginner gardeners. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it today. The first tip that I have for you is that the most important thing when it comes to care requirements overall is going to be the lighting requirements, followed by the watering requirements. There are obviously so many facets to plant care beyond just the light and the watering. There's the soil, the planter material, the planter size, the list goes on, but overall lighting is going to be hands down the most important requirement. And that is simply because plants need to photosynthesize in order to grow, and photosynthesis involves light. And inside the home is a little bit darker than you might expect in most cases. Once we begin to move away from the windowsills, the amount of light that our plants are receiving drops dramatically, and that's when we're going to start experiencing most of the issues that we have with our plants. Maybe the leaves that your plants are putting off aren't up to par, they're not the size or as beautiful or as luscious as they were when they were in the nursery, or maybe you're experiencing some root rot issues, or your soil is staying a little too wet too long. These are all problems that just giving your plant the appropriate amount of light could remedy. Specifically with the watering, your plants need to be receiving the appropriate amount of light to process the water that they are receiving correctly. So above anything, lighting is so important. In fact, that's the first thing you should be asking when you're in a houseplant store before you even wonder the watering requirements, because that seems to be the first thing that people are wondering. Ask about the lighting requirements or do the research on the lighting requirements, and if you do not have those lighting requirements available to you in your home, I would recommend just skipping the plant altogether, because without the adequate amount of light, your plant is really never going to grow to its fullest potential. I'm guilty myself of bringing many plants home and putting those plants where I want to put them and not necessarily where those plants want to be. And those plants are what I like to call future garbage. So save yourself some money, do the research on the lighting requirements, or ask questions about the lighting requirements when you're in the plant store shopping for plants, because these are the things that you need to know before you bring your plant home. But for my second tip, let's flip back a couple of pages to those watering requirements I was just mentioning that everybody was always so curious about. At least when I worked at a houseplant store, the first thing I would always get asked about a houseplant is, how much do I water it? And I would say, roughly every 5 days or once a week, or when the soil is like halfway dry, but people would be like, no, how much do I water it? Like a quarter of a cup, a full cup. And I understand that logic, but you don't even have to worry about that. It's not about how much you water, it's about how often. Every time you're watering your houseplants, you should be giving them a full saturation. If your plant would leak water out of the tray, or if the soil's become hydrophobic and it's just falling right through and spilling out everywhere, just take it to the sink, take it to the shower, throw it in, give it a good watering there, let it sit for a while. I will crowd up my shower with a bunch of houseplants, and I will use the shower nozzle, or I'll bring the watering can in there if I have too many, because, you know, the shower nozzle can only hit so many plants at once. So a really easy way to water your houseplants, or more a thorough way to water your houseplants, but I will also just spot water my plants around my home with the watering can, going ahead to water them until the water is just starting to appear in the drainage tray or basin below. I will leave that water in there because 9 times out of 10 the soil is going to be in contact with that water still, or the planter material is unglazed or porous, which would suck the moisture back up inside, and the plant is very well watered. Of course, you can be a little too heavy-handed and have some spills there, so sometimes I will keep a towel handy, but at this point I've learned the plants that like to overflow, and I will just nip that in the bud and take them right over to the shower to begin with. But just to drive it home, it's about how often you water your plants. It's not about how much, because you should be watering your plants a nice thorough watering every time and just letting them dry out the appropriate amount in between. So now we got the plant care out of the way. My first 2 tips are really about the nitty-gritty of plant care, but now that you have that in your back pocket, it's time to pick out a couple of plants. And my third tip is to start with the basics. I highly recommend getting to know the easy, more common varieties of houseplants. Think the ones that you're always going to find when you walk into a houseplant store. Some of them are very interesting. Some of them get knocked for being too common, especially on social media, but All of these houseplants are common for good reason, and it's because they're easy to care for. So I highly recommend trying out a bunch of these, or not a bunch, however many you are comfortable with, but these common, easy houseplants, because once you find yourself gravitating towards one or two, you can start to do a little bit more research on that specific plant, because there are many varieties of like every plant out there, whether it's the species varieties or just relatives that look similar or just very closely related. For example, the golden pothos. Maybe you really fall in love with your golden pothos. There are a bunch of other varieties of Epipremnum aureum, which is the genus and species for golden pothos out there, like the neon pothos, the jade pothos, the marble queen pothos, the manjula pothos. The list goes on and on. There are so many pothos, but you could delve even deeper and try out a different species. So you could try out an Epipremnum pinnatum. So Epipremnum aureum is the golden pothos. Epipremnum pinnatum is the Cebu blue pothos. So a close cousin to the golden pothos, but still going to give you some nice variety. And before you know it, you might have 15 plants in your house, all different, but they're all very closely related, because if you can care for one, you can care for another one. And it's best to start out with the most basic variety, because that's where you're going to get the basics of the plant care for the plant. And with social media, I know it's tempting to get the most weird, rare, uncommon, whatever you want to call it, plant out there. And those can be fun to grow, but if you do the research and you find out it's maybe not the easiest houseplant to grow, maybe you want to try out one of those wild anthuriums with the nice crystalline foliage, why not just try one of those standard flowering Anthurium andreanums that you're going to find at all flower shops and houseplant stores in wide availability that are going to cost you $10 or less, just to make sure that you in your home are able to get a few nice leaves on that houseplant before you spend $100 or $200 on a plant that you really have no idea to care for. So please start with the basics. You will not regret it in the long run, especially once you have some nice, large, luscious, beautiful, common plants. Like I said, they are common for a reason, because they're easy to grow. And while we're on the topic of picking out houseplants, my fourth tip to you is going to be to please keep in mind when you are picking out your houseplants in the store that they are going to look completely different in 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now. I am also guilty of this. Especially when I worked at the houseplant store, I'd receive a tray of plants and it would be hard not to just pick the nicest one out of the tray and bring it home with me. Pay for it, of course. But it really doesn't matter, because all of those houseplants that I picked out back then out of the tray, they look completely different now. Whether it's that they're dead or that they've flourished and they've become nice, big, beautiful houseplants. There are some houseplants, just a select few, that I'd say buy them looking how you like them, and that's going to be any very slow-growing succulent houseplant like a Haworthia or a snake plant is going to be my best example of a plant. You gotta buy it looking how you want it, because it's going to look like that for a long time. But any leafy houseplant that's going to be actively growing, don't stress about the way that it looks. If you find your dream plant at the houseplant store and it doesn't look amazing, but you know that it has a good root system, go for it, because that plant is just gonna grow. And you're going to feel so much more rewarded when you're growing this houseplant into this little wimpy plant into this nice, large, beautiful monster, dare I say. Trust me, it's going to feel so much more rewarding than if you just bought the nicest looking one out of the tray, which by all means, if it's available to you, go for it, please. I'm just saying, don't stress out if the plant's not looking the best when it's at the houseplant store. As long as it has an adequate root system and you have the proper care requirements for it at home, I'd say go for it. I think there's nothing to lose. My fifth tip for you today is going to be, once you've brought home those houseplants from the houseplant store, make sure you let them acclimate to your home for an appropriate amount of time. I know, I've been there. You just got the nice houseplant in the mail or at the houseplant store and you have the perfect planter waiting for it and you desperately want to plant it inside and stage it in your home where you imagined it. But please let the houseplant acclimate to your home. Think about it. The houseplants have been through it at this point. Specifically, if you got them at a houseplant store, you might think that houseplants are going to be even more stressed going through the mail, which maybe freshly out of the mail, yes. But plants at a houseplant store have been through way more transit than typical plants that you're getting in the mail. Because when you're buying stuff in the mail, you're most of the time, I mean, at least the places that I buy from, I'm getting them directly from the greenhouse where they have been grown. And they have not been through the journey that many of these plants that you're getting at the houseplants go through. When I would buy plants when I worked at the store, I would get them through a third party most of the time, which means that these people were getting them from Florida. So these people had their plants trucked in from Florida, they now have them at their space, and then I'm purchasing plants from them, so they are now trucking these plants to me, and then they're in the houseplant store, and then if someone's coming in and bringing that plant home, they're bringing it to a fourth location. That is 4 different locations that this plant has been in. It's traveled to and from each one. Versus when I get them in the mail, yes, they have to be packed up and shipped through a box, and they might be wrapped up in different ways than the plants are shipped when I would get them delivered at the houseplant store. But that's a lot less. But in any case, let your plants acclimate. I'd say 2 weeks minimum before you go ahead and replant them. But what I would more say to do is, if it's the growing season, wait till a nice new leaf comes in on your plant. If it comes in kind of wonky, wait for another leaf, wait for a nice leaf to grow on your plant before you go ahead and repot, and then you should be in good hands and have some smooth sailing from there. If it is not the growing season, if it's the winter months, I would not do anything. I would just leave the plant be. Of course, there are exceptions if you're working with the easiest plants on planet Earth, like those common plants that I was talking about earlier, just like a standard snake plant or a ZZ plant, and you need it for a gift or something, go ahead, go crazy, repot it. But if you're going the extra mile and you're getting that nice fancy philodendron that you really wanted, I'll be damned if you repot that right away, because it's not going to be happy with you. So please let your plants acclimate. I know you want to get them in that nice planter. Like I said, I've been there. But if you want what's best for your plants, please let them acclimate to your space. They will thank you later, and you will thank yourself when you have less future garbage. And speaking of those beautiful planters that you bought for your plants at the plant store, maybe I should have talked about this before, but my tip number 6 is drainage holes are a must. If the planter does not have a drainage hole in it, do not repot it, because it's not a planter, it's a cash po. It's not meant to have a planter directly inside it, it's meant to stage a plant inside it. So a cash po or a cash pot, whatever you want to call it, is just those standard planters that you're also going to probably find at every single houseplant store or garden center that looks just like all the other planters around. It's just, there's no drainage hole in it, and you could drill into it, it's fine, but if there's no hole, do not plant that plant in there. I don't care what you saw on BuzzFeed about putting gravel in the bottom of the planter. No, don't do it, please. There is no drainage. If the water can't come out, there's no drainage. You cannot create drainage in a planter without a drainage hole. I'm sorry, I get so heated about this, but I cannot tell you how much I used to hear this when I used to work at a plant store, and I'm flashing back right now. Please don't do it. Your plants are going to die. Please don't try to prove me wrong. It's just so much easier to just drill a hole in the planter, or just don't plant anything directly inside it. In fact, things can look fantastic just staged inside a planter. I have plenty of things staged inside planters. This isn't a cash po, but this is just sitting inside here, and you can't even tell until I flip it forward. You know what I mean? Anyway, just don't do it, please. I'm asking you. I care about you and your plants. I'm here to help you today. But while we're still talking about the planters, my tip number 7 is to deliberately choose your planters. Deliberately choose them with a drainage hole, please, but also deliberately choose the style. Whether you're following a color story or an overall aesthetic that you have in your home, you will thank yourself in the long run. The amount of planters I just bought because they were there and they were cheap and I didn't care what they looked like, these smorgasbord mismatch cluster of planters that I had like 2 or 3 years into my indoor gardening journey, atrocious, atrocious. Please follow a color story. You can do whatever you want. You can follow whatever budget you have, but I'm just letting you know, I regret not sticking to a color story. I could have even just gotten all terracotta. That's following a color story. It's inexpensive and it's a fabulous color story for a nice rustic, bohemian appearance. You could even get just plain white planters if you're looking for a more modern or minimalistic thing. There are so many inexpensive planters out there, but just follow an aesthetic. That's really it. That's all this tip is. Just follow an aesthetic, because you're going to regret it in a couple of years when you have 30 to 50 to 100 planters that are just cheap garbage. At least to me now. I guess maybe I liked them back then, but now I have so many, I've thrown out so many planters over the year and just left them out in the street for people to pick up, which free planters, but you can tell I'm getting heated about this because I don't like wasting stuff. I don't like garbage. I don't like throwing stuff out or having to get rid of stuff because it's just not good for the earth. So please, just deliberately choose a planter. It's more important than you think. My 8th tip today is going to be about pest problems, and that They are going to happen. If you don't like bugs, if you're like terrified of bugs, reconsider getting plants. I feel like that used to blow my mind. I feel like years ago, there'd always be like a random YouTube video that would pop up being like, some girl being like, I found bugs on my plants and I threw them all out. Honey, what did you expect? You're bringing plants into your home with dirt. Even if you don't do dirt, if you skip the dirt entirely and you do just like hydroton pebbles or soil-free home, whatever you want to do, you are still going to have bugs. You're still going to have insects, pests, whatever. It's going to happen. And I'm letting you know this not to scare you, but to prepare you, because it's not stressful. I think people always comment on my YouTube videos when I am like doing a houseplant tour or whatnot, and I find like a mealybug or some thrips, and I don't even bat an eye, because I'm gonna take care of it. It's fine. I've dealt with it before. It's not a big deal. Is it disheartening when you find a plant completely like infested? Yes. But maybe you should keep a closer eye on your plants in the first place, which, once again, I'm guilty of not doing, and I learned from my mistakes, and that's what I'm here to show you today. So I have videos on pest management. There's plenty of ways to do this. I'm not going to go off about it in today's video. There are plenty of other videos by other creators, I'm sure, that can also be very helpful. So do your research on pest management, but just please know it's going to happen, and it's not something you should stress out about. And also, if you don't like bugs, you shouldn't get plants. But moving on to my 9th tip, it's going to be that yellow leaves are going to happen. Once again, it might get stressful when you start to see your plant that looks so beautiful at the houseplant store start to get one of its leaves that turns yellow. And I'm here to tell you it's nothing to worry about. Well, maybe it is something to worry about if you're getting a bunch of leaves turn yellow at one time. That might involve some troubleshooting, which will likely involve you increasing the light of the houseplant because the plant is probably not receiving the amount of light that it should be receiving. Taking a hard step back to tip number 1 there, but yellow leaves are completely natural, and it's something you're going to find with your plants, especially if you're taking care of them properly. I have this example of a plant right here. This is an Aglaonema, or a Chinese evergreen. This one right here is an Aglaonema Silver Bay, one of the most common varieties of Chinese evergreen out there. Highly recommend it. Beautiful, easy houseplant to grow. This is a rather slow-growing houseplant, and this, like many other houseplants, has this kind of natural progression as the plant grows, where you're going to start to find that these lower leaves, so you can see these 2 lower leaves right here, they're not really yellow yet, but they're starting to look a little tired. And while the rest of the plant looks completely fine and fabulous, these leaves are just starting to get a little tired looking, and over time they will continue to yellow, and eventually I will pull them off, or they will fall off naturally as they get dead enough. And that allows the plant to put more energy into these leaves up here, and that's what's going to leave you over time with this cane down here. So you're going to see on a lot of plants, specifically ones that grow up in like a tree form in the houseplant world, you're going to find a lot of plants that have this like trunk that has these etchings on them. So each of these brown rings that goes around the trunk or the base of my Aglaonema here, that's where a leaf once was on the plant. And when I purchased this plant, it was leaves all the way down to the soil, barely any cane showing. And over time, probably every couple of months, a leaf starts to turn yellow and fall off. And that is just naturally how the plant grows. It's nothing to be alarmed of, but like I was just saying, if your houseplant is having like 3 or 4 leaves turn yellow at one time, at that point I would probably troubleshoot the plant, and like I mentioned, it's probably a lighting issue or a watering issue that's caused by a lighting issue, but it's just completely natural. I don't want anyone to be alarmed if you just have 1 or 2 leaves just slowly turning yellow over time. It's only if you are having some like scary fast yellowing of leaves or a lot of yellowing of leaves is when I'm going to say, hey, maybe figure something out. But I think it's safe to say that if only 1 or 2 leaves are turning yellow, you can stay mellow. Turning a little toilet humor into some plant tips today, but my last and final tip for you is going to be to embrace plant death. You're going to kill plants. It might take a long time. I think I didn't kill a plant for like a year or 2 when I first started getting my feet wet with indoor gardening, which makes no sense to me now because I feel like I kill like 1 plant a month. We have a muffin coming in to say hello. Quick muffin interlude. I know we're near the end of the video, but she just wants to say hi. Okay. So make sure you keep in mind what you did wrong with these plants. I'm always thinking about everything I possibly have done wrong with a plant before I try it again. I usually have a 3-strike rule with my houseplants. I will give them 3 tries, and if that 3rd try I do not have any remote success, I'm not trying that houseplant again. Usually for me, it's a lighting issue. Going back to tip number 1 today, there's also plenty of other things to troubleshoot. Perhaps the humidity is a big one too, or the type of soil or the planter material can also come into play, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the light. So maybe just try growing the plant again with more light, or if your plant is starting to die, increase the light. I think that might be the biggest takeaway from today's video. Muffin, please stop messing with the tripod. She just wants attention. But yeah, every time a plant dies, I don't mourn the plant. I learn from my mistakes, especially if I want to try that plant again and I want to feel more optimistic about it. It's really important to study what you're doing wrong or figure it out. Maybe you don't know what you're doing wrong and you're going to just do something completely different your second time. In some cases, it's all trial and error, but it's just important to learn, and it's good to learn. Knowledge is power and gardening is fun, and I want this to be a fun hobby. I don't want it to be stressful. So I'm here to help you today. I really just want you to have some smooth sailing with indoor gardening, and I really think these tips are going to help you. Please take them and run with them. These are some good tips that I really wish I had when I was first getting into indoor gardening. I think I would have had a lot less plant death and a lot more success. So I think that's it for today's video, my 10 tips for indoor gardeners. I think you're practically a novice gardener now, if not an intermediate gardener. Whatever the next step up is, I still don't know. But thank you so much for joining me today. If you don't already, you can follow me on Patreon for even more houseplant content. Follow me at Philly Foliage on TikTok and Instagram. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day. Muffin, say bye. Say bye, Sweet Pea. She hates it.